We now come to the second amendment on reception of this report. Could I ask Councillors Boswell and Speck to move and second their amendment, which relates to paragraph 1, dealing with early childhood services?
I formally move, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
I formally second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Could I also call upon Councillor Mrs Tracy to move paragraph 1?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move paragraph 1.
We're getting up to the witching hour, so could I ask for briefish speeches? Councillor Dawson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, in view of the lateness of the hour, I'll try and be reasonably brief, certainly after your indulgence with my question earlier on this evening. But there are just one or two points that I'd like to make with opening the debate. And I start by saying that I think all on this side of the House recognise the very valuable service that is provided by 1 o'clock centres over many, many years. I doubt if anybody who's brought up children in this borough will gainsay that view. And it was reinforced at our discussions by petitions received from Nappy Valley and Made for Mums, and therefore also to take the opportunity of acknowledging the contribution and commitment of staff who've worked at those centres, often with long service. And the second point, as context, I'd like to turn to is the importance of what happens in the early years of a child's life. Extensive research now documents this, and it's the Labour MP Frank Field who is absolutely convinced that it is the home learning environment that is the crucial factor in determining life chances for a young child. And so it's parents and carers reading with very young children, talking to them in a positive language that he characterises as two very important points. And therefore it's of considerable concern both at the OSC, and you'll see it in the paper, and it was at the early years partnership, as to whether the rapid increase in the provision of these part-time early education places for 2-year-olds from 20% in this September to 40% next year is really the best use of scarce taxpayer resources. For Wandsworth, it means finding 900 places by this September, doubling to 1,800 by September next year. So the third point is really, where can those places be found? Wandsworth is rightly proud of its early years team and the work that they do. They're skilled and professional officers, so they're going to do everything in their power and ability to make sure there's sufficient good quality places are available. And that will require considerable effort from the private, the voluntary and the independent sector. And I note that the Labour amendment seeks to exclude the private sector from this provision. This will only undermine any chance of it successfully providing enough places. It seems to be so driven out, it's so driven by really out-of-date dogma that it could well have been drafted by Ed Balls himself, I think. There are only 600 places that have been identified as being provided by existing provision, vacancies or expansion, and that's after very extensive consultation with the early years sector. So therefore the councils had to look at what facilities could quickly be brought into use to provide these places at Ofsted standards. Now it does mean that several 1 o'clock centres will in future provide 2 sessions per day of early education. And as the leader pointed out in response to a question early on in this evening's discussions, they're not being closed. So really we should nail that at the very start. Which brings me to the final point I want to make, is how to maintain the stay and play facilities in the borough. That's the essential core of 1 o'clock provision. Now these will obviously continue at children's centres and in many voluntary groups across the borough. We know of at least 26, I think, when we last asked the question, but there are many more that are not known and not registered with the council. And in passing, I would just encourage colleagues to look at the Family Information Service website if they want to find where those provisions are in their own wards and in their own areas. But in addition, the report proposes that any potential providers are assessed not just on the provision of the 2-year-old education offer, but also on the provision of stay and play. Now maybe that'll be later in the day, or maybe at weekends. And it's that latter suggestion which really has garnered considerable support from many hard-working parents and carers. So, in conclusion, Mr. Mayor, it's quite a complicated paper, set of proposals, seeking to comply with government policy, but also to maintain, though change, some provision of a very cherished service. So I would ask the Council to reject the Labour amendment and support the recommendations in the report.
Thank you. Councillor Speck, please.
Thank you. Yeah, the changes proposed in the report on the provision of services for very young children and their parents is going to affect a large number of people and children in the borough. The new provision of free early education for disadvantaged 2-year-olds that we hope will help a new group of these disadvantaged children is welcome to see, but it is at the expense of cutting services we provide for 0 to 3-year-olds and their parents currently. And this is the result of an ill-thought-out policy from the government, which is now in an Education Act, but without the corresponding funding and resources to put it into practice, and we here are having to sort it out. The early years education of our children, without the necessary funding, could also mean there is less control of the facilities and the facilitators, resulting in learning not being as good as it currently is, and the results of performance of the children actually dropping from good or outstanding to satisfactory, and hence having the opposite effect of what is intended. The government policy in the Act is requiring us to provide a stipulated number of part-time places for 2-year-olds, but is flawed on many fronts. Apart from the resource issue, there are many practical issues on the ground. And it's also flawed in the offer of a 3-hour daily session that's insufficient if you want parents to be able to go to work for any length of time. By the time they've got there, got back, time's up. And many of us, as Councillor Dawson just said, many of us in this chamber on both sides know the value of the joint children-parent work that is currently provided. So we do need to do further lobbying of the government on this so that new services, which we agree are important, are funded properly, but that we're not cutting other vital preschool services that we know have a proven good track record in enhancing the learning chances of young children in the borough. At the OSC, we had a deputation and petitions submitted, a keen debate, and actually a very close vote. It really was, yeah. One difference between us, that's going some. But there were key issues, key points from that debate, apart from obviously the loss of experienced staff. It is the fact there's no alternative provision for the 3-year-olds being proposed. So I'm hoping somebody in the market's going to do it, but not everybody can pay to do that. And it also is a vital provision, especially for new and young mums and dads, and involvement of parents generally. And that's vital, and we're going to lose that if we're not careful. It's a vital role in the socialisation of children and the minimising of isolation of parents. And secondly, I think the rationale, and one of the reasons we all got hundreds of emails on this, for the closing of the 1 o'clock clubs, and I know it's semantics, the buildings aren't closed, but the role's changing, so it is closing. And it is because the rationale is to provide the 2-year-old provision, but this is questionable on various counts. Some of the clubs, it's suggested are going to be closed, are not in the areas where the 2-year-olds are, so it's going to be difficult for them to get there. It means that many parents accessing these places would be required to travel. And that means this facility we're going to put into place, there's a risk of failure if they've got to start journeying across, and that it may not get used by those that need it. We need to look again at this. The other bit, which I still can't get my head around, looking at the changes, is in particular the closure of the one in the Battersea Park, which made no sense at all, because it's not going to provide 2-year-old provision. And if you did want to close it for that, it actually is near Latchmere and Queenstown disadvantaged areas, so people might use them, but it's going to be a cafe. I still can't see the logic of that. We do want to see this provision for the disadvantaged children, but we do need the services that are very different in many ways that we've already got, that would be going. The government has put through the measures without the resources. They haven't thought it through properly, either educationally or practically, and we're having to try to find hundreds of places very quickly. Shouldn't be at the expense of important services in the borough, and we need to look again at this. We need to be rethinking about how exactly these services complement each other. They're not in competition. So what our amendment is asked for is for this to be looked at. We've got a service we've been proud of, another one coming in, and actually it might seem the easy way of doing it, because there's the buildings here and buildings there and we can use it, but we need to look again how we can accommodate both services, so I would urge everybody to vote for the amendment.
Councillor Boswell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Scaling up free early years childcare provision for economically disadvantaged 2-year-olds is laudable. For children living in problem families, intervention as early as 2 is proven to increase life chances, with free childcare providing a structure to their often chaotic lives, helping them at an early stage to interact with adults and other children and helping prevent problems in later years. But in order to deliver these free childcare places, the impact on existing children's services must be properly assessed and thought through. Otherwise, you risk setting service against service, central government absolves itself of all responsibility, and local councils are left to pick up the pieces. Applying a dog-eat-dog market approach, where there will always be losers, to such essential services like state-funded childcare benefits no one. Now, those were words written by me, not for this speech tonight, but actually a year ago when this issue, or nearly a year ago, when this issue first came to the Chamber, and when the alarm bell over the major challenge that we all agree the Council would face to provide these free early years places was first raised. Now, I want to ask what representations were made to central government to point out the flaws in this policy, particularly the predictable difficulties in ensuring that disadvantaged toddlers' parents or carers actually take up this offer? And why was the solution settled on that, certainly in the case of the provision at Bolingbroke and also Windmill 1 o'clock clubs, which are not in areas of deprivation, which will exacerbate this problem, as the parents and carers will have to travel to that provision? And also, if the take-up is poor because of this, 1 o'clock provision for everyone will have been lost to make way for a policy that won't work anyway. Also, why wasn't an audit made of available council buildings which could be adapted to provide the free childcare in areas nearer the need? What alternatives were sought which would have saved the 1 o'clock provision and the jobs of staff, many with years and years of experience of providing the service, as Councillor Dawson has said this evening? And it's not like there isn't an alternative. You only need to look over the border at Labour Lambeth for an example of an alternative approach to delivering the 2-year-old offer. Instead of a quick fix, market economy-led approach that you're adopting, where one group will always lose, because that's how the market works, doesn't it? Faced with the same problem, Lambeth have been able to deliver the free childcare offer without losing their 1 o'clock provision for everyone else. And they've been working with the not-for-profit sector, cooperatives, voluntary groups, residents' associations, charities like kids' companies and mutuals. So, a Labour-run Wandsworth Council would have partnered with Lambeth in adopting this not-for-profit solution. We would have been able to successfully bid, unlike this council, to run a pilot scheme with Lambeth, which they've done over the past 10 months, enabling them to iron out problems, share learning with other Labour councils. And in fact, they've already announced their providers. They're good to go to run this provision. A Labour-run Wandsworth Council would not be selling off play buildings, which were once open to all, to become commercial cafes, and letting the market decide the price of children's play. Because actually, on this side, we understand that universal services like 1 o'clock clubs create the glue which holds our communities together, providing the chance for mums and parents from all backgrounds to interact with each other and their children to play and learn together, discovering that they have more in common than what sets them apart. creating healthy communities which are able to work together and making huge economic savings in the long run. From the number of emails I'm receiving from mums and parents in many of your well-to-do wards, they are horrified by the social divides you are creating around children's play, between those who can afford to pay and those who cannot. For example, the plans at Battersea Park to charge children to use some play structures and not others. And they do not agree with your assumption that they would welcome this segregation, and I have this in quotes from one email, because apparently you think that they wouldn't want their little Johnnies and Jemimas rubbing shoulders with kids from the estates. It's clear this is a deeply unpopular solution, and this council has used the demand for the new provision as an opportunity to cut services, which was never what this policy intended. I am pleased the closure of the 1 o'clock clubs have been put back to the end of the summer holidays, and hope the consequent extended period of consultation with the public will encourage you to look at alternatives. I commend our amendment.
Councillor Mrs Tracy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I thank everyone for their contributions. I'm not sure, well, I mean, we all realise Councillor Boswell doesn't read her council papers, but I'm not quite sure what she thinks the delay till August is going to change, because we're not consulting on whether or not we go ahead with these proposals. We are just consulting on how we will deliver the stay and play in those proposals. So the 5 1 o'clock clubs that were mentioned in the paper will be changing the way that they operate. The vast majority of the Labour amendment is the same as ours. The one bit that I do object to, and Councillor Dawson has mentioned this, and it is completely misunderstanding the early childcare market by trying to exclude private and the independent sector from delivering some of these places. And I cannot get the rationale that the Labour group would want to not offer these places in the very best provision in the borough, which is within the private and the independent sector. So I don't quite understand where they're coming from on that, and I would totally and completely reject it. We had the discussion earlier, and Councillor Osborne was talking about the time isn't in the too far distant future when perhaps libraries will become redundant. And libraries are very cherished by some members of the community, as are our 1 o'clock centres. But the 1 o'clock centres were opened over 30 years ago at a time when there was no child provision at all in this borough, and you couldn't take your children for a coffee in Northcote Road and feel comfortable, and you certainly couldn't feed your child anywhere. And things have radically changed since then. And more recently, we've opened, and we have 14 very thriving children's centres, which weren't there when the 1 o'clock centres were opened. And the move to actually target resources on a group within the population that perhaps need that help and support more than most, and it will benefit the universal services in the long term because it will make those children more ready for school, has got to be right. And again, I don't understand the mixed messages that are coming from the Labour group that are saying that my residents in Wandsworth Common Ward are not deprived and therefore don't need the 2-year-old places, but do need the 1 o'clock centre, which is using a very lovely and quite expensive building to maintain. I just don't understand that. A, because all our wards have a growing 2-year-old population, and all our wards have a proportion of deprived. Oh, actually, deprived is a bad term, because although this is 40% across the country, in Wandsworth, it's 50% of 2-year-olds. 50%. And that means that all our wards will be providing youngsters that will be entitled to this. I actually, earlier today, had a really interesting discussion with somebody who is setting up a new nursery, and asked what what exactly was it that was behind the 2-year-old offer? And I explained that the government was trying to get people back to work. And she asked me if there were any grants that would be available for her in extra space that she has within the premises if she ran the 15 hours over 2 days to be putting on courses that would make people, mothers perhaps, work ready. I mean, this is the sort of innovation that some of our local providers are interested in looking at and want to provide. So to suggest that the market actually automatically provides, creates losers, I don't accept at all in this area. It is difficult. Everybody knows what I think about the 2-year-old offer and the fact that our children's centres have been doing such good work with trying to get mothers and children to bond. However, we are going to deliver this, and we are going to deliver the best 2-year-old offer that is absolutely possible, with all the extras that I have absolutely no doubt either the private, the independent or the state sector will add on to make this happen. So I ask the Council to reject the amendment.
The matter now before the Council is that the amendment proposed by Councillor Boswell and seconded by Councillor Speck concerning early childhood services as tabled at this meeting be approved. Would you please indicate by a show of hands all those in favour of the amendment? 13. Thank you. And all those against the amendment? And those abstaining? The result of the voting then is 13 for the amendment, 37 against the amendment, nobody abstaining. The amendment is lost. So, in terms of adopting, do we take the same numbers? Thank you.